two things. First, we were founded by St. Alphonsus Liguori, who was a Italian, a lawyer, who later became a priest and was moved by the experience of encountering poor people in the hills outside of Naples. Moved enough that he left his career in that city behind, and as his first biographer said, turned his back on the glory of Naples to live and die among the poor shepherds and goat herds of the midsection of Italy. There's a lot more I could say about him, but the other thing I want to say is why we write CSSR after our names. It stands for the Latin version of the Congregation of the Most Holy Redeemer, Congregatio Sanctissimi Redemptoris. But a lot of people who hear us say it really stands for Carefully Selected Sermons Repeated. Now, I don't know if I repeat sermons, but I certainly repeat stories, because I have some that I like very much. So if you've heard this one, please don't move your lips. It regards an author that achieved some fame in the 1970s. Some of you might remember, I know it was before your time, but his name was Peter Benchley. And Benchley was a novelist that got a lot of acclaim for a book that he wrote about a fish. It was called Jaws, maybe you saw it. What some people don't know is what Peter Benchley did before he achieved fame as a novelist. He edited, I believe, the Washington Post, and I think he may have worked on the New Yorker or one of the weekly literary magazines. Then he had a short and not very glorious career in the White House. He was a speechwriter for Lyndon Johnson, and he wasn't a very good speechwriter. So the chief of staff relegated him to writing one speech a week. It was called the Rose Garden Rubbish. It's what the little nosegays that the president would fling at whoever happened to be there on a Friday afternoon. That's what Lyndon would do. He didn't do a very good job with that. So the chief of staff called him in and he said, look, this isn't your thing, you're finished. Write one more speech for the president and then pack your bags. So with a heavy heart, Benchley sat down at his typewriter. I imagine a lot of you don't know what that is, but it's a machine you write with. And he typed out these little 3x5 index cards that a lot of us used to use going through college. His final Rose Garden Rubbish. And he handed it to the president on Friday afternoon, just as the president was going to step out into the Rose Garden. Now Johnson put the cards in his suit coat pocket, as he always did, didn't look at them. So he stepped out at the podium and put on his spectacles, and he said, unfolded the cards, and he said, my fellow Americans, today I'm going to tell you how we're going to end poverty in the United States of America by the end of the year and cut taxes. He went to the second card, and it said, I guess I'm also going to tell you how we're going to end the war in Vietnam by the end of the month and stop communism. He went to the third card, and it said, you're on your own, Lyndon. If you talk to groups, you have that experience frequently. But when I speak with a group like you, people who are dedicated to the mission of Catholic Charities in the Archdiocese, I don't feel like I'm on my own, because I'm sharing a vision with people who have that vision. You know, the vision of a church that is faithful to all three of its principal activities. We know that Pope Benedict XVI, in his first encyclical, reminded the church of the three activities that make the church church: the proclamation of the word, the celebration of sacraments, and the exercise of charity. I'm grateful for all the good work that you do that make it possible for our church to be faithful to all three, and especially the third, the exercise of charity, a church that reaches out and lives her mission of service to the poor and vulnerable in central and southern Indiana. I also want you to know that I pray for you every day, several times a day, because I know how difficult your job is. I think if we serve the poor, we accept that we share their lot. Not fully, none of us lives the misery that can be part of poverty. But in a certain sense, we share the insecurity, the frustration, and at times the degradation that the poor endure in our society. And that's why I pray for you. The challenges you face were highlighted for me last April when some of you were probably with us when we were at South Bend. And we talked about what it means to be poor in the state of Indiana and what should be the church's response. The good work that began at that meeting is continuing. But I can recall being struck by some of the facts that I heard there in South Bend, that nearly 20% of the people of Indiana live in poverty. And as you're well aware, most of these poor are women and children. The number of people living in poverty in our archdiocese continues to increase. Two reports released in the state last week illustrate both the extent of the poverty problem in Indiana as well as the consequences of poverty. These reports confirm why Catholic Charities is needed now more than ever. The first report, Trends in Poverty, was produced by the Police Center at IUPUI and analyzed poverty in trends in Marion County from 2000 to 2012. The report demonstrates that poverty in Marion County is increasing at a rate greater than the rest of the state and the nation as a whole. Nearly 200,000 people in Marion County now live in poverty, including 32.8% of the children in the county. The report shows convincingly that Hispanics are more affected by poverty than any other racial or ethnic group in Marion County. Last week also saw the release of a report that shows one of the devastating consequences for people who live in poverty. Perhaps you saw this report. A study from the Indiana Health Department reported that the number of suicides in our state has increased slightly every year for several years in a row. State health officials say suicide was the second leading cause of death among 15 to 34-year-olds in the state between 2006 and 2010. The third leading cause of death for adolescents between 10 and 14, and the 11th leading cause of death overall. Now, as much as we like, there are no shortcuts to addressing these problems. We must invite people to rethink what they know about poverty, how they imagine poverty, and connect our faith and spiritual relationship with God to how we deal with others. Now, I'm sure there are plenty of days when you feel overwhelmed and underappreciated. And although this may not be much solace, take heart. You're in good company. Let me talk about some of the company. Because last week we celebrated the feast of two saints who in their own day often felt overwhelmed and not always appreciated as they worked to care for the poor. But they knew that with God's help, they could carry on. Last Thursday, October 3rd, was the feast day of one of the patrons of our archdiocese, St. Mother Theodore Guerin. And Friday, October 4th, was the feast of St. Francis of Assisi. Let's think a moment about these icons, St. Mother Theodore and Francis. St. Mother Theodore Guerin, who is the patron of our saint of our archdiocese, was born in France in 1798. When she turned 25, she joined a young religious community in France that was called the Sisters of Providence. Perhaps when we think about St. Mother Theodore, the first thing that comes to mind is her role in starting Catholic schools in Indiana. But we could also consider her as one of the founders of Catholic Charities, at least being imbued with the Spirit that keeps you going. The Sisters of Providence were teachers, but they also had the mission of caring for the sick who were poor. In 1839, the Bishop of Vincennes asked the Catholic communities in France to send sisters to teach and minister to the many French, Irish, and German immigrants in Indiana. The Superior General of the Sisters of Providence thought that Sister Theodore Guerin was the best person to lead a group there. In 1840, Mother Theodore and 5 sisters traveled by ship, stagecoach, steamboat, train, and canal boat to reach the small farmhouse in St. Mary of the Woods that would be their home. Imagine they got lost once or twice on the way as well. Now the challenge was great. But Mother Theodore and her sisters, soon after arriving, opened a school for girls, a school that accepted all girls, regardless of their faith background. Another school followed the next year. Mother Theodore overcame many obstacles in the region. Anti-Catholic sentiment was strong, and food was short. Illness and hardship claimed the lives of some of the first sisters. But the sisters did not give up. Mother Theodore returned to France briefly to recruit some sisters and raise money for schools. She even won over the Queen, who paid for the sisters' return passage to America. I guess she was good at networking. By the time Mother Theodore died in 1856, at the age of 58, more than 60 sisters were running 11 schools and 2 orphanages in Indiana. One of the schools is today St. Mary of the Woods College. Our archdiocese has been blessed by this holy woman in more ways than we can begin to count. The congregation founded by St. Theodore is very appropriately named Sisters of Providence of St. Mary of the Woods. Providence, as you know, is the belief that God, the giver of all good gifts, will supply everything that we need. It is faith and trust that God will do exactly what He promises. That is, care for us as a loving mother cares for her child. Mother Theodore had great faith and trust. She is a wonderful model for all of us. And Mother Theodore's trust makes me think of a meeting that I had some years ago with another holy woman, one who has been beatified, Mother Teresa of Calcutta. I met her years ago in the city of Detroit when I was a chaplain for her sisters in the inner city. The sisters at the time were living in an apartment. It was a small place, and they had a rather strict landlord who would not allow them to bring in any visitors. And the sisters really wanted to minister, especially to abandoned women and children that were roaming the streets of Detroit. They needed a house. Now, Mother Teresa was nobody's fool. So she came to the city knowing that there'd be a fair amount of publicity and also a big mass and probably a collection. The sisters invited me to come to the mass, and I was happy to celebrate. But everybody was there. The Cardinal Archbishop was there, and all of his auxiliaries, and everybody who was anybody in the city was there to welcome Mother Teresa. So after Mass, I gave up any hope of speaking with her. Saw her over there, and went back to our community. And the next morning, I got up early because I promised a blind lady, that I'd try and fix her toilet. She was having some plumbing problems, and not only did she have plumbing problems, but she had a lot of little dogs in the house. So as I was kneeling with my arms around the toilet trying to get a wrench on the back, these dogs were biting me, and finally, taking advantage of this poor woman's blindness, I got up and booted one across the room, figuring it would set an example for the others. And Chole, who was her name, Chole Espinosa, said, "¿Qué pasa, padre? What happened?" I said, "Chole, it's a miracle." I said, "One of your dogs just flew across the room." And she said, "Bendito sea Dios, blessed be God." Well, I got back to the community, and I was a mess. Everything that I picked up at the house was on my coveralls. And the phone rang, and it was one of these Indian sisters. And she said, "Father, Mother wants to meet you." And I said, "Oh my God." I told her. They told her about my sermons. I said, "Well, you tell Mother that I'm going to get cleaned up, and I'll put on my cassock, and I'll be right over." And the sister got back on the phone and said, "Mother says